Hello everyone, welcome to another video discussion. This time our topic is sign languages. In the previous video discussions, we already had a comprehensive review on what communication is in a multicultural setting. We have also learned that communication varies from one culture to another. If we have observed, one specific speech community follows some codes when it comes to communication, given the context, the needs that they have when communicating or transacting with the members within the community. Same is true with the next topic that I will be discussing to you, the use of sign languages. We know that sign languages are also culture specific, which means the sign language used by one culture may be totally different from the sign language used by another country or another group of individuals. So this time we shall be understanding the role of sign languages and how they help in making people adjust and cope with the demands of communication for a specific speech community. Before we proceed, let us have a glimpse of the definition and the nature of sign languages. A sign language is a language that utilizes signs made with the face, hands, and other movements. If you could remember in the previous discussion, I highlighted about kinesics. The use of body gestures and facial expressions will allow you to communicate a message as well. Now, in this context, we are talking about sign languages, which is a language that basically makes use of different signs or semiotic symbols, semiotics or symbols, which portray messages through the use of face, hands, and other bodily movements. Sign language is a way to communicate through hand gestures and symbols, which are often used by deaf and mute. We understand that one. Sign language is relayed through manual articulations, which include facial expressions, hand gestures, and body movements. But if we notice, the sign language used by the deaf and the mute is different from what we could understand in this context. We know that the sign language used by the deaf and mute has specific codes, codes which represent significant symbols in making them communicate effectively within their group. Sign language in this context could also mean the use of facial expressions, hand gestures, and other body movements, which will allow you to relay the message or channel information towards an individual or members within a speech community. A sign language is conveyed to have a shared and or common understanding of a message. Well, this is basically true when you use it within your own speech community. You have certain symbols, hand signals, body gestures, which signify something specific only for your speech community. A sign language also involves encoding and decoding of messages to the target participants because messages are sent, then encoding and decoding need to happen in the communication cycle or process as well. A sign language aids you to create connections with others from different places with diverse beliefs, cultures, and customs. Even if we say that sign languages are culture specific, there are specific sign languages which could also be used universally, which means this may be true from one culture to another. Let's say a hand gesture or a hand signal may be meaning similarly from one culture to another. A sign language also allows you to persuade, inform, and entertain the people around you. When we talk about flexibility of human language, this means that human language shows its adaptability when deafness leads to speech inactivity. It takes another way through signs and symbols. So when you say flexibility of human language, that means humans as we are, we always find way on how we could communicate effectively with people despite some limitations mentally or physiologically speaking. When we talk about sign language relativity, sign languages are not universally understandable across cultures, although there are some symbols or signs which could be understood by other cultures, but mostly sign languages are culture specific. The signs and symbols may be offensive while communicating with people who convey a different language. So that means, let's say, you have this specific sign language that for your speech community, it may be acceptable, but once used in another speech community, it may already appear offensive. Okay? So this time, we shall also understand why there are advantages when using sign language. A sign language, let us take note, offers varied opportunities not only to parents and their hearing impaired children, but also to others and their target audience, paving the way to adopt and adapt to people and the world. But in the context of this discussion, I will be talking about sign languages not only as those codes used by deaf and mute, but also the kinesics that we use when communicating verbally or orally towards a person or another group of people, or a speech community to be specific. Communication between culture is facilitated by the availability of a common language. We know that we communicate because there is this access to a language that is used specifically by a specific speech community. The said premise of Castigador in 2019 is analogous with the concept that there must be a common understanding through sounds and symbols that people utilize for talking or writing. That is why in a given speech community, a specific code, okay, or sets of symbols are used to communicate because it follows that these codes are well understood by all members of the speech community. Living in vast diversity, though, it's possible to experience language barriers during work, travel, or everyday life. Say, for instance, meeting people who speak different language can be challenging. For example, if you're a Filipino and you are not that well versed with the use of the English language, you might find it challenging conversing with an English speaking foreigner who asks for directions going to a specific location or place, right? Since there is this language barrier which hinders you from communicating effectively, then the message is not channeled effectively towards the second party of the communicative process. How will individuals connect in the absence of common language then? So with a little patience and creativity, it is still possible to communicate despite language barriers. That's according to Evans in 2014, because we always find ways on how we communicate effectively. If we do not use or utilize kinesics when communicating, we also use other semiotic symbols which channel, okay, or relay message towards people. Now, we cannot avoid language barriers. Let us admit it. Language barriers in terms of multicultural communication are totally inevitable. Hence, what we need to do is to adjust ourselves and make sure that we adapt with these language barriers so that we could still communicate effectively to people. One way of rising above language difficulty is using sign language. As people move across borders, explore opportunities, and interact with others, a common language becomes a need to thrive. That is very true in a society that also wants to make sure that all people or all members of the community could understand one another. With that, the contribution of sign language is gaining momentum and showing evidence that it is a necessity in today's society. That's according to Berry in 2020. Before we delve deeper into the discussion on sign languages, let us trace the history of sign languages. In retrospect, sign language is traced back before Christ and during the Renaissance. Though varied theories arise as to why and how these sign languages evolved, nobody can actually point out the early origin of sign languages. That's according to Larson and Hallen in 1998. Perlmutter in 2013 added that in the second half of the 20th century, several observed that numerous thoughts are definitely expressed in signs, which are assumed as an ungrammatical form of English. Afterward, sign languages are utilized to substitute for speech. Well, if we notice during the historic times, sign languages are used to perhaps convey secret messages. Of course, when you want your message to be understood effectively, but secretly, okay, observing confidentiality when relaying or channeling these messages, you also need to observe the proper means on how you could communicate this with confidentiality. And the use of sign language came handy in this sense. According to Castigador in 2018, a sign language is perhaps older than spoken language, which may comprise of hand gestures, shrugs, facial expressions, or coded manual signals strengthened through the use of words reflected in the alphabet. Okay, let us also remember that even if we use sign languages often, we also need to back them up with words so that some of these sign languages can still be well understood. This is particularly true when you use sign languages in the context of symbols or images. However, if let's say when you do hand gestures or facial expressions, maybe you can pair them up with sounds, okay, to make your message being relayed more understandable. Okay? This time, let's talk about the flexibility of human language vis-a-vis sign languages. Perlmutter in 2013 conveyed that sign language as a language has been discovered over the past half century. With that occurrence, it's not only about the discovery of sign language, but also an exposition of language itself. Because whether we admit it or not, sign languages are still a form of language. It magnifies that a human language is more flexible than had been imagined because it exists either in the auditory or visual aspect. Undeniably, human language shows its adaptability that when deafness leads to speech inactivity, human beings or humans use language for them to thrive within the community or for them to communicate signs or messages. Okay? Sign language and its existence. A sign language is a language that involves encoding as well as decoding of messages through the use of hands, face, and other body movements. Messages are conveyed through gestures, facial expressions, and other forms of body movements. It is done to achieve a shared and or common understanding of a message. For example, when you wink, that means a wink may signify something depending on the context for the context why you winked to another person. Okay? Through sign language, a better understanding of other people and the world happens because it creates connections with others from different places with diverse beliefs, cultures, and customs. But the disclaimer here is that when you use sign languages, you need to be very, very careful with how these sign languages are used geographically speaking. As mentioned a while ago, what might be acceptable in your culture might appear offensive in other cultures. So you have to be mindful with the use of the proper use, okay, the proper use of sign languages. This time, I'm going to present to you some examples of sign languages. Okay, let's have these things. The horn finger, okay, pointing out the differences as to the context or the usage of the sign languages would also allow you to understand the culture of a specific country or nationality. For example, for the United States of America, the horn finger is a sign of approval, okay, such as when you say to rock on as adopted by rockers. However, when you go to Italy, Brazil, Portugal, and Spain, it is a sign of cheating. It is telling someone that his wife is a cheater. Imagine when you converse with someone and then you do this sign, and let's say you're an American and then you are in Italy, for you it may sound rock and roll or it may present sign of approval, but for the person witnessing you doing this hand gesture, you might be signaling that the male or the man in front of you has a wife who's a cheater. Okay, so be careful. Fingers all together. So we know that Italians are very fond of doing this hand gesture. For Italy, or for the Italians, it's a sign of inquiry. Okay, what is it or what do you want? It's followed by a flick of the wrist. Okay, but in Congo, this hand gesture symbolizes that you are telling that something is of small amount. Okay, and when you go to Egypt, this hand gesture symbolizes time. It's a motion that you only have a minute. For example, you still have a lot of things to say in front of the public. However, the person signaling you this might be telling you that you have to wrap up everything because you only have few minutes to share whatever you need to share to the people. Okay? Next one is the V sign. Now, here in the Philippines, we know that this symbolizes peace, right? However, if you go to Australia, Ireland, United Kingdom, and New Zealand, this one is actually a symbol of rudeness. It signifies contempt, defiance towards authority. For example, if you're here in the Philippines and then you committed a crime, let's say you jokingly do the symbol in front of police officers. It means you are telling these police officers, peace, I do not intend to commit such a crime. But when you go to Australia, let's say you do this in front of police officers, that means you are signifying contempt or defiance of the authority, which simply says that you are not respecting the police authority. So let's be careful with the usage of this sign as well. Okay? We also have the finger summoning. Here in Philippines, Japan, and Singapore, it's also a sign of rudeness. Okay? This sign is tantamount to calling dogs. So when you do this one towards a person, it's actually a disrespect. Okay? It should not be used to let someone come over to you because in other countries, it may mean differently. Okay? Last two examples with the use of hand gestures is when you do this sign. Or in the USA, UK, and the Philippines, this is a sign for okay, absolutely fine, or everything is good. But when you go to France and Belgium, this is a sign for worthlessness. It means zero or worthless. Let's say you go to a pawn shop and then you show your jewelry, and then the person in charge tells or gives you this signal, that means it has no worth. If you are in the context of France and Belgium. But when you go to Japan, it's also a sign of money. I think this symbol being a sign of money is true not only in Japan, but also here in the Philippines. Okay? And then, here in the Philippines, you also have this superstition wherein when your palm is itchy, that means money is yet to come to you. That is also true in Ghana. Okay? When your palms are itchy, that means money is coming to you. Okay? Maybe today or the next day. Okay? Aside from the sign languages, we also need to be mindful about our body posture because it also signals our confidence. This may not be used by the deaf and the mute, but this is widely observed by everyone, by all of us humans, most especially when we do public speaking. Yes, when we do public speaking or we deliver public addresses in front of a large crowd of people. Okay? Take a look at the first image. The first image reflects a girl who is anxious or timid. Okay? And signals of being anxious or timid are eyes low or darting around, tension in shoulders, shaky or fidgety or closed off stance. Okay? However, if you have that confidence in you to speak in front, then definitely you'll have the power pose as evidenced in the second image. Eyes looking forward with strong eye contact with the audience, hands still or hips on the side, or hips or by sides, and open, grounded stance, which symbolizes confidence. However, be careful because the second image may also be misunderstood as arrogance. Okay? How about for the gentlemen? Okay, even for the ladies, when your eyebrows are raised, it signals discomfort. Okay? In terms of eye contact, if you stare very long, it may indicate lying. It may appear like you are deceiving. another person. If the voice goes up and down, this means interest. Okay, that means you have the enthusiasm to communicate with a person. In terms of the positioning of legs, if legs are crossed, this signals resistance and low receptivity. That means you are not being receptive of the things that you are told. However, if legs are expansive, okay, and your posture appears to be authoritative, it shows leadership. And if legs are shaking, of course, it symbolizes or it shows that you have a shaky inner state, which means you're nervous, perhaps. Okay? This time, let's proceed to sign language relativity. Although having similarities among languages, sign languages are relative, which means that these are not mutually understandable across cultures. This is what I mentioned a while ago. You cannot expect that one practice or one sign language could be widely accepted by another speech community coming from different culture. Consequently, words may have different meanings. We know that. And the gestures may deem offensive while communicating with others who speak a different language. One good example for this is when you put your hands here on your waist. If you are here in the Philippines, this may simply mean that you are tired, you're just relaxing, okay, from a strenuous activity. However, when you go to Argentina and you do this one, that means whoever is in front of you is being invited to a fight. Okay? Unknowingly, a person might approach you and suddenly punches you just because you did this gesture right in front of him. Okay? So you have to be careful with that one. Hence, what works in one culture doesn't work in another. I have to reiterate this one. When interacting with individuals who speak a different language, thus, people may tend to be self-conscious for not understanding the words being used. In the process, the preferred gestures to reinforce a conversation are not really intended to be offensive. Okay? And we cannot blame these people because there are some people who might not be too knowledgeable about the different sign languages and meanings of these gestures and other kinesics employed by different cultures. That is the reason why it's very important that we know how culture plays an important role in communicating effectively with people around us. Okay? And since I mentioned about sign languages, might as well give you a brief discussion about its advantages. Okay? Learning the sign language can open varied opportunities not only to parents and their hearing impaired children, but also to others in their target audience. It's not only that sign language is used only for those who have impairments. Sign language is used to be communicative, okay? To be communicatively engaged with people around you, despite the fact that you or the other party might have some difficulties or limitations when communicating. Indeed, sign language paves the way for a better understanding of other people because understanding the sign languages, the gestures, the body movements, and the facial expressions would also open doors for you to understand the culture of that specific speech community. And as a consequence, connection is created with others from different places with diverse beliefs, cultures, and customs. Okay, this will possibly happen. Sign languages, therefore, lead us to adopt and adapt to people and the world. So, to everyone, you might underestimate the usefulness of sign languages. You might not imagine how purposeful it is to use sign languages. At the end of the day, let us always remember that sign languages are used not only by those who have defects when it comes to hearing or speaking. Sign languages are also used by different cultures. And these codes, symbols, and signs are used within a speech community to perpetuate communication and transaction on a daily basis. In the absence of kinesics and all forms of sign languages, a specific speech community may not be able to flourish in terms of communication because communication is not always about saying words or uttering words or making sounds. Sometimes you can be silent and communicate already something through your facial features, the wink of the eye, the pouting of the lips, or even the waving of your head. All of this may transmit messages effectively. Okay, so that is why there is a necessity for us to really understand how sign languages work for a specific culture. And consequently, we also start understanding how one culture works in a given speech community. So if you have questions about this discussion, can you post them in the open forum? And I will be very glad to address each one of them. Thank you very much.